All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be acting like philosophers a bit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, grappling with some pretty big questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and really the whole universe.
Sounds right up our alley.
And to guide us through this, we're going to be looking at the work of Gustav Theodor Fechner, a 19th century German thinker who was a scientist, but also had this deep pull towards metaphysics, which makes him a really fascinating figure.
Yeah, and you sent me that entry on him from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy,
Oh, right. Yeah.
which, wow, just a comprehensive look
hmm
at his whole life and work, his scientific contributions, his philosophical ideas. I mean, it's all
It's
there.
like a great resource. Yeah.
And what really struck me is how, well, kind of how contradictory he seems at times.
I know, right? That's exactly what we're going to try to unpack today.
Okay, good.
How could someone so committed to scientific observation also develop these really imaginative, really far-reaching metaphysical theories?
Right, exactly.
So we'll be looking at his unique approach to philosophy, his ideas about consciousness, especially this idea that it might not be limited to human beings.
Okay.
And also why his struggle to reconcile science and metaphysics is, well, it's still relevant to us today, to anyone who's ever, wondered about the big why questions.
All right, I'm ready to dive in.
Me too. So let's start with this idea that Fechner had a kind of divided soul, as the Stanford entry puts it.
Okay.
He lived from 1801 to 1887, so right in that period where both Romanticism and the empirical sciences were really taking off.
Right, a really interesting time.
And on one hand, he was drawn to positivism, this emphasis on observation, measurement, verification, the idea that knowledge should be based on what we can actually experience and confirm.
Like, phenomenal world is what's real.
Exactly, yeah.
But then there's this other side to him, right? This desperate longing for metaphysics, as the article calls it.
Right. It's almost like he couldn't be satisfied with just the individual findings of science. He
Yeah.
wanted this grand, unifying vision of the cosmos.
He wanted to see how it all fit together.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, I think, where that tension really comes from, this kind of meticulous scientist grappling with these big, sweeping metaphysical questions.
And, it makes sense when you consider his intellectual background, right? He started out studying nature philosophy, which was this attempt to understand nature as a unified whole, like to find the underlying principles that govern everything.
Right. And that was very much influenced by Romanticism, right? This idea of the interconnectedness of all things.
Exactly. But he also studied physics and physiology at Leipzig under Weber and Volkmann.
Oh, wow. Those were pioneers in the experimental study of perception.
Yeah, and so he was exposed to this more rigorous, more empirical approach to science. And you can see how that might have created some conflict with the more speculative approach of nature philosophy.
So he's kind of caught between these two worlds.
Yeah, and it's interesting because each side sort of produced its own results.
Right, that's a good point.
So, from his positivist side, we get his early scientific work, and of course, his groundbreaking Elemente der Psychophysik, which tried to precisely map the relationship between mental experiences and physical processes.
Okay, so that was him trying to be really rigorous, trying to apply scientific methods to understanding the mind.
Exactly, and that led some people to view him as a kind of materialist, emphasizing the role of the body in our mental lives.
But then on the other hand, you have his panpsychism, which is this idea that the entire cosmos is in some way psychic, that mind or consciousness is a fundamental aspect of everything.
And we see this in his later works like Nana and Zendavesta.
And those definitely come from his metaphysical side.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting because according to the article, Fechner tried to bridge this gap between positivism and metaphysics with what he called inductive metaphysics.
Okay, that's new to me.
Yeah, so unlike the German idealists like Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, who tried to deduce philosophical conclusions from abstract principles.
A priori reasoning.
Right, exactly. Fechner believed that metaphysics should be based on empirical science, that you should build your philosophical system from the ground up based on what you can observe and verify.
So like a posteriori reasoning.
Yeah, exactly. But, it makes you wonder if you can really derive these grand metaphysical principles solely from the limited and always changing findings of science.
Right. It's a fundamental question about the nature of knowledge, isn't it? So can we ever really know anything for certain beyond what we can see and measure?
Well, Fechner certainly thought it was worth trying, and he insisted that his panpsychism wasn't just some random speculation.
Right.
He argued that it was based on inferences from experience, And he challenged anyone who disagreed with him to actually engage with his arguments instead of dismissing them out of hand.
So he was trying to be rigorous, even in his metaphysics?
Absolutely. And I think the article is right to point out that for a long time, scholarship really emphasized Fechner's metaphysics, especially his panpsychism, but more recently, there's been this tendency to see him primarily as a kind of non-reductive materialist, downplaying the metaphysical side.
And I guess the Stanford entry is arguing against those one-sided interpretations.
Yeah, it emphasizes that his panpsychism was a central part of his thinking throughout his life.
Okay, so it's like we can't understand him fully without taking both sides of his work into account.
Exactly. And to really grasp the roots of his ideas, we need to delve a bit into his early life and this really significant mental breakdown he experienced.
Yeah, that seems like it played a big role in shaping his thinking.
It did. So he came from a religious family.
Okay.
Both his father and grandfather were pastors, although his father also had some leanings towards the Enlightenment.
So there's already some tension there.
Right. And he was a bright kid, showing a lot of academic promise early on, went to the University of Leipzig when he was just 16.
Wow. So,
But to support himself, he had to take on a lot of translations and literary work, which, as we'll see, contributed to his later struggles.
okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so in 1839, he had this really severe mental breakdown.
Oh, wow.
It lasted for 4 years, and it was triggered by just intense overwork.
Overwork, like too much thinking and writing.
Yeah, he was working on this massive household encyclopedia, the House Lexicon.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. He was trying to write authoritatively on everything from philosophy to, like, how to set a dinner table.
Oh my gosh.
And it just led to complete exhaustion, physical symptoms like near blindness and insomnia, but also this really troubling mental state.
Like what kinds of mental symptoms?
The article describes it as obsessive thinking, and he had to live in this completely darkened room. He couldn't read or write.
Wow, so he's basically cut off from everything he loves.
Yeah, and he talks about how the boredom just became this torment. Even conversation was unbearable.
So he's isolated both physically and mentally.
Exactly. It was a really desperate situation, and the experimental Chinese medicine treatment he tried, using moxa, actually made things worse.
Oh no.
Yeah, it led to digestive problems, near starvation. I mean, it was really bad. But then he had this unexpected recovery.
Okay, so how did that happen?
Well, it's kind of strange, but the article mentions a specific food that seemed to help, dried ham.
Dried ham.
Yeah, of all things. But what's really significant is this mystical experience he had during his recovery.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The article describes it as seeing his garden as alive. Like
Yeah.
everything was suddenly illuminated from within, as if radiating its own inner life.
So it's not just that the plants are alive, it's like they have some kind of consciousness.
Exactly. And this experience became the central motivation for all of his later philosophical work, especially his development of panpsychism.
Okay, so that's the direct link.
Yeah, he saw this vision of a living, ensouled world, and he felt this need to articulate it, to explain it.
So that brings us to his panpsychism.
Yeah, so let's define it properly. The article is careful to distinguish it from simple organicism.
Which would be the idea that everything is alive or interconnected, but not necessarily conscious.
Right, and Fechner was definitely an organicist in the sense that he saw the universe as a unified whole, but he went further than that.
He believed in a form of consciousness extending even to plants.
Yeah, and this is where his 1848 book, Nana, or On the Soul Life of Plants, comes in.
That's his argument, that plants are conscious beings with feelings and even a kind of volition.
Exactly, and a key part of his argument is this analogy to animals.
Okay, explain that.
So we readily ascribe souls or some kind of consciousness to animals because they behave in ways that seem similar to us.
Right, they move, they react, they seem to have emotions.
Exactly, and Fechner's point is, well, plants share a lot of similarities with animals too. They have life cycles, they respond to stimuli, they have basic biological needs.
But they're also very different.
Of course, and Fechner acknowledges that, but he argues that the differences don't negate the possibility of a soul.
They just suggest that plant souls would be different from animal or human souls.
Exactly. And he addresses some of the common objections to this idea, like the fact that plants don't have a central nervous system.
Which is a big one, right? Like, how can you have consciousness without a brain?
Right. But Fechner asks if nerves are the only way to produce sensation.
He's saying that nature might have other ways of achieving the same thing.
Yeah, and he even proposes that plant fibers might serve a similar function to nerves.
Okay, that's interesting.
Another objection is that plants don't move.
Right, they're rooted in place.
But Fechner points out that they do move, just vertically. They grow towards the light. They send roots down into the soil.
So they're not completely immobile.
No, and he also argues that even if their actions are determined by physical necessity, that doesn't mean they can't have internal mental events.
Okay, but the article does mention a weakness in his argument.
Right. His definition of soul or mind is a bit unclear.
Like, what does he even mean by those terms?
Yeah, his criteria seem to shift between sentience, the capacity for feeling, and purposive activity, and he even acknowledges that there can be organic development without conscious awareness.
So it's a bit fuzzy.
It is, and it's worth noting the contrast with thinkers like Schelling and Hegel, for whom purposive activity didn't necessarily equate to consciousness.
And Fechner even criticized Hartmann's philosophy of the unconscious, which posited the subconscious life throughout nature.
Right, so he's trying to carve out his own position here.
Okay, so from the souls of plants,
Yeah.
he then moves on to even bigger things.
Yeah, in his 1851 work, Zendavesta, or On the Things of Heaven and the Hereafter, he extends his panpsychism to planets and the entire cosmos.
Wow, so now the whole universe has a soul.
Well, the organic universe, he's specific about that, and the article emphasizes the religious dimension of this work.
Like, it's almost a defense of ancient natural religion.
Yeah, although distinct from Christianity, and again, he uses analogy to support his argument.
Okay, so what's the analogy this time?
He compares the earth to the human body. Both are self-contained wholes, made up of different materials, undergoing cycles, developing and differentiating, even possessing a kind of circulatory system.
Okay, I see. Rivers, atmosphere, those sorts of things.
Exactly, and based on these similarities, he concludes that the earth is a kind of higher organism with its own soul.
And then he goes even further, right?
Yeah, he suggests that individual souls are actually part of a single, overarching consciousness, similar to Averroes' idea of a universal intellect.
So we're all connected on this deep psychic level.
That's the idea, and he saw God as immanent within this universe, the one and all, a kind of synthesis of Christian and pagan ideas.
Leaning towards pantheism, although he distinguishes his view from Hegel's.
Right, and all of this is coming from his metaphysical side.
But then we have that other side, right? The positivist, the scientist.
Yeah, and that comes through really strongly in his 1855 work on physical and philosophical atomism.
Which is a very different kind of book from Nana and Zendavesta.
It is. Here he's arguing for the real existence of atoms based on the best standards of observation and experiment of his time.
So he's pushing back against the philosophical view that atoms were just fictions.
Exactly, and this was a big debate in the mid-19th century.
Right, because it was tied up with the rise of materialism.
Yeah, and Fechner actually tries to separate atomism from materialism.
Interesting. How does he do that?
He argues that believing in atoms could actually support belief in God and immortality.
Okay, so he's trying to find a way to reconcile his scientific views with his religious beliefs.
I think so. And the article distinguishes between his physical atomism, which is based on empirical evidence,
Okay.
and his philosophical atomism, which aimed for a more ultimate understanding of matter.
So, like, what are atoms, really?
Yeah, and it raises this question of how his belief in these discrete fundamental particles square with his earlier organic vision of the universe.
It does seem like a tension.
It does, but his main justification for atomism was its explanatory power.
Okay, so he's saying it just explains things better than the alternatives.
Yeah, he argued that it provided a better account of things like the refraction of light, heat radiation and conduction, isomery, crystal formations, even the breaking of a rubber band.
So he's drawing on a lot of different scientific observations.
He is. He even talks about the ether theory, although he acknowledges that it's still uncertain.
But the core of his defense seems to be this modest empiricist approach.
Right, focusing on what we can observe and explain.
But the article also mentions a more aggressive philosophical defense.
Yeah, where he basically dismisses metaphysical questions about the thing in itself as meaningless.
So he's saying we can't know anything about the ultimate nature of reality.
Well, at least not through philosophical speculation. He defines matter as tangibility and rejects any attempt to go beyond experience.
Which is interesting because the article points out that this anticipates Otto Liebmann's later critique of metaphysics.
It does, but it's important to remember that Fechner's target was specifically contemporary German idealist philosophy.
So he wasn't rejecting all metaphysics.
No, just the kind that he saw as too speculative, too disconnected from experience.
And he wanted to build his own philosophical atomism based on an a posteriori methodology grounded in natural science.
Exactly. So he saw atoms as limiting concepts in our analysis of experience, defined empirically, but still possessing some qualities reminiscent of Leibniz's monads, like simplicity, extensionlessness, independence.
Which, as the article notes, brings up the classic problem of how extension can arise from non-spatial points.
Yeah, it's a complex and maybe even contradictory picture, but I think it shows how he was constantly trying to find a way to bridge the empirical and the metaphysical.
Okay, so finally we get to his theory of mind.
Yeah, which the article suggests might actually be independent of his panpsychism.
Interesting. So you could accept one without accepting the other?
I think so, and his theory of mind is developed in a few different works, Zendavesta, Über die Seelenfrage, and Element der Psychophysik.
And it starts with this distinction between the internal and external standpoints of observing a human being.
Right, so there's how we experience ourselves from the inside,
Oh.
and how we appear to others from the outside.
And he's saying these are two different appearances of the same thing.
Exactly, it's a two-aspect theory of the self, like a coin with two sides, mind is one side, body is the other.
And they're not two separate things, just different ways of looking at the same underlying reality.
Right, which is what he called neutral monism.
Okay, that makes sense.
He also says that these two appearances are causally connected.
Meaning that they influence each other.
Exactly, which is important because some dual aspect theories deny any causal link between the mental and the physical.
They say they're just two sides of the same coin, but they don't interact.
Right, but Fechner saw this interaction as essential, and this leads to his most universal law of psychophysics.
Which states that everything mental has its expression in the physical.
Exactly, and the article points out that this principle might be biased because it seems to emphasize the role of the body in mental life.
Right, it's led some people to label him a materialist.
It has, but the article also notes that his universal law implies a kind of efficacy of the mind on the body.
Which isn't really typical of materialist theories.
No, it isn't, and the article briefly mentions the roots of his theory in Schelling's nature philosophy.
Okay.
But it emphasizes the differences in their development. Schelling saw mind and body as manifestations of a single living force. But Fechner, with his commitment to atomism, took a different path.
And unlike Schelling, Fechner didn't rule out the possibility of interaction between the mental and physical.
Right. So as we've seen, Fechner's philosophical journey is really fascinating. This constant attempt to bridge the gap between scientific observation and metaphysical speculation.
It is, and I think the enduring power of his work lies in the questions it raises.
Yeah, like what is consciousness really? How does the mind relate to the body? And how can we build a complete picture of the universe when it seems to present us with both concrete data and these hints of something more?
It's like he embodies that tension between the desire for concrete answers and the yearning for deeper meaning.
He does, and I think a lot of people feel that same tension. So here's something for you, the listener, to ponder.
Okay.
When you look at the world around you, where do you see the boundary between the physical and the psychic?
Ooh, that's a good one.
What aspects of reality seem to hint at something more than just material processes?
Right, like, is consciousness limited to humans and animals?
That's a question Fechner grappled with his whole life, and it's one that continues to spark debate and wonder.
It definitely does.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Gustav Theodor Fechner.
It's been a real pleasure.
As always.